Welcome to the masterclass, the science of roof risk assessment. You won't need a safety harness today, but you'll learn insights and strategies to enhance your approach to underwriting and rating residential and commercial roofs. Let me introduce today's speakers. Ross Martin leads Zesty AI's risk analytics practice. He's an industry veteran, having worked in the P&C space for the last 17 years. This included over 7 years at Farmers Insurance Group, where he personally inspected thousands of roofs for wind and hail damage. He went on to lead product management teams, including at large P&C insurtechs. He lives in Appleton, Wisconsin, with his wife and 2 daughters. And me, I'm Sam Fetchero. I lead the marketing and product marketing functions here at Zesty AI. My background is in risk. I worked for 7 years at Capital One, where I developed consumer and small business credit models. And since then, I've led product marketing teams at Microsoft and various fintech startups. Let me share a bit why we at Zesty AI are so passionate about this topic. We're a property and climate risk analytics platform fueled by the power of data science. Our team of brilliant data scientists and engineers apply sophisticated AI and machine learning to vast data sets, creating cutting-edge models that predict and prevent losses from major threats like wildfires and severe storms. Our solutions empower insurance carriers to face their biggest challenges head-on. We help them write new business with precision, refine their rating models for fairer pricing, and optimize their portfolios for greater resilience. Here's our agenda for today. I'll start with the problem of the roof and what we've learned surveying the industry and some research we did within CERF filings. Then Ross will look across the roof rating journey into the pros and cons of each method for assessing roof risk, using a case study, using actual carrier data for an apples-to-apples comparison of each approach. So why are we here? The damage from severe convective storms has dominated insurance news in the past few years. This secondary peril isn't so secondary anymore. Losses have increased more than 8-fold in the past 20 years, reaching over $60 billion in 2023, with a compound annual growth rate of more than 11%. The initial read on 2024 paints the same picture. The first half of this year was the second highest for insured losses, trailing only behind last year. So our objective today is to help carriers improve their approach to rating and underwriting roof risk. We want to help carriers improve their risk segmentation of roofs by using new data sources and evolving their modeling approach. Data sources include roof age, condition, complexity, climate, and more. And modeling approaches include using heuristics, a GLM or generalized linear model, and GBM or gradient boosting modeling. We'll show that by increasing the sophistication of data sources and modeling approaches, carriers can drive a step change improvement in their risk segmentation, moving from a lift in the low single digits to 60x lift or more. Now, that may seem hard to believe that that type of lift is possible, but Ross will show you how in just a few minutes. But first, we want to hear from you. We have a polling question, and we'd love to get your input on it so we know where folks in this masterclass stand. Which approaches does your organization currently use to assess roof risk? And you can select all that apply. Roof age, roof condition, roof complexity, peril-specific models, or maybe none of the above, or you don't know. So go ahead and enter your answer, and we'll reveal the results in just a minute. Okay, let's look at the results. Roof age, 90% of our attendees using roof age today. Roof condition, 77%. Complexity, a little bit lower, 23%. Peril-specific models in third place at 30%. So Ross, any reaction to these results?
Immediate reaction is a pretty good spread here. Roof age, I'm not surprised that just about everyone in the industry is using that. Very similar to what we see. I am a little surprised on the complexity numbers. This is maybe a little higher than I would have anticipated. So excited to talk about the pros and cons of these later on.
Awesome. Well, thanks for filling out that survey, everyone. Well, as you know, the roof is a major source of claims for carriers and where problems start, from water to wind and hail. Wind and hail make up about 40% of all homeowners insurance claims. And claims that typically involve the roof make up more than half of insurance claims. And when the frequency and severity of claims from severe convective storms are increasing, as we talked about earlier, this is causing combined ratios to increase. Last year, the combined ratio was above 100 for the industry as a whole for the second straight year, and the trend is getting worse. There are many drivers here. Natural catastrophes are certainly playing a role. Insurers are dealing with aging books in an inflationary environment, and regulatory pressures are making it more challenging to adjust rates in a timely manner. And there's been a hard market for reinsurance. So What are carriers doing about rising losses and combined ratios? So far, many have resorted to broad strokes to address the rising storm risk. We surveyed over 200 P&C insurance professionals and asked them what their organizations are doing to help mitigate the risk from severe convective storms. 63% of respondents are using inspections and manual underwriting reviews. This approach is costly, and certainly on the residential side, you can't inspect every property. A little more than half have a strategy to apply deductibles and ACV roof endorsements. And then about a third are using letters of repair and non-renewals. But the devil's in the details. How they're applying these tactics is just as important as the tactics themselves. You can't inspect every property, so how do you choose which ones? And if you peanut butter spread the same wind and hail deductible across every property, you'll end up chasing away good business and being left with undesirable business. So this would be a good time to hear from Ross. You're speaking with carriers every day as our risk analytics lead. What are you hearing from the market as far as how carriers are applying these strategies?
Yeah, very similar to what you mentioned. A lot of the peanut butter spread approach. I have seen a move away from inspections, especially manual inspections. And maybe what I would add to this list that I see quite often with our carrier partners is things like roof replacement schedules and anti-cosmetic damage endorsements for various roof types like metal roofing.
Makes sense. Well, the peanut butter spread is making the news. And here are just a handful of recent headlines. Commerce Department warns homeowners to check insurance for wind, hail coverage changes. And regulators and legislative bodies and even watchdog groups are sounding the alarm of broad coverage and policy changes. Iowa insurers cut roof coverage, leaving customers with big bills and jeopardizing mortgages. And last one here, homeowners insurance is through the roof in Oklahoma, and the roof might not be covered either. So clearly there's a pushback from policyholders on the increasing rates and changes in coverage. And carriers that deploy these loss cost control measures the best will come out the winners from the standpoint of combined ratio, market share, and customer satisfaction and retention. So this is a masterclass, and here's your syllabus. We're going to go through this roof rating journey for carriers as they deal with the roof and the associated perils. Ross is going to dive deeper into each of these steps along the journey. So no matter where you are in your level of sophistication in evaluating roofs, there's an opportunity to learn and advance your methods and application. So let's go back in time and see how the industry has evolved and advanced along this journey. So we went back into SURF to find the first rate filing using roof age as a rating factor. According to SURF, the first to use roof age as a rating factor was the Hartford back in 2004. And I know we have a couple folks from the Hartford on the call, so give yourselves a pat on the back. This filing is from Iowa, and the same rating factors were filed in several states in 2004. So just look at that rating factor. Can you imagine only applying a 10% surcharge for roofs 26 years and older? Today, some carriers aren't even writing a roof older than 15 years. So this is quite the blast from the past. So as we look at the next decade, we saw the use of roof age skyrocket, growing at a 32% annual growth rate. Then in 2018, that's where we saw roof condition begin to show up more and more in filings. Over the past 5 years, we've seen roof condition grow in usage at a 37% annual growth rate, growing faster than roof age in its heyday. And meanwhile, roof age has hit a plateau, growing only about 5% during the same time period. We've also seen an increase in roof complexity variables, such as roof pitch, roof facets, seen those show up. Ross will dive more into this when we get to the case study. And now the next shift is starting to occur. This year, we saw Zesty AI's Z-Storm suite of models, including Z-Hail and Z-Wind, filed and approved in Texas, Colorado, Illinois, and pending in other states. The reason we're seeing so much innovation in this area is because the industry needs it. The pace of innovation is matching the needs of the market. And clearly, a new paradigm is needed, and a new class of risk product is necessary to address the losses from severe storms. So now let me turn things over to Ross, who will take us through a case study, looking at each of these approaches along the roof rating journey and the differential lift a carrier could expect. So Ross, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Sam. I think so far you set the stage really nicely when we think about the history of where we've come on this roof rating journey and some of the challenges that we faced in the last year, thinking about the economic challenges, reinsurance, the pressure of rising SCS claims, to say the least. So the next part of the webinar, we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to dive into some data and take a look at how each one of these approaches stack up against a carrier's portfolio and against each other. The idea here is how can we get closer to truly pricing to risk and help move the carrier and the carriers in the industry to that upper right-hand corner of the chart we see there. We thought what better way to do this than with a carrier case study, like Sam mentioned. And so a little bit of background on that. We're going to see a lot of data. It's always important to understand where it came from. So this is live carrier data. And we took a swath of their portfolio across 17 states that include either predominantly wind and or hail damage. And we did a true retro study. So we looked back 3 years, claims ranging from 21 through 23, about 100,000 locations, so 300,000 records total. And what we did was we took our Zesty AI data, that would be roof age, roof condition, a multitude of features that help define roof complexity, and then of course, the outputs from our wind and hail predictive models. These scores were all appended retroactively and were the score indicative just prior to either renewal or inception of each one of those policies. So we're going to use this to underpin and slice these 4 different methods and see how each performs. We're going to start out with roof age, and Sam mentioned this was sort of the oldest. We saw that filing from about 20 years ago, and it's pretty intuitive to understand why, right? As a roof ages, it's natural to think that its performance against claims would start to decline and its ability to sustain weather-related damage. But we want to look at some material science and really understand, why does roof age matter? We pulled 2 predominant reasons why we find roof age being really impactful. One, which is on the left, which is seal strip degradation, which is more about wind damage on the roof and wind susceptibility. And then the second is more related to hail damage, which is the idea of accumulated damage or granule loss to the rooftop. We're going to start on the left here with this seal strip degradation. And both of these cases are work done by IBHS. And what they found is that each shingle has an asphalt strip on it. And the whole point of this is to basically secure each course of shingles to the row below it. And the reason that's important is for a roof system to perform well, it's got to work as a cohesive unit. And what the IBHS found during their research is that around the 10-year mark, this sealant strip starts to degrade and start to reach a point of failure. In particular, it does so in the areas you can see highlighted in red here on the screen. These are areas where that seal strip is forced to breach 2 shingles on the layer below it. And the reason these areas are particularly susceptible is due to thermal expansion and contraction. So think about high heat areas, maybe poor architecture where the roof system is getting overly hot. But the key takeaway here is we know around the 10-year mark, based on this research, that we have this degradation effect. Now, the other reason from a material science standpoint that roof age is critical is it's the best way to capture accumulated damage, which really rears its head in the form of granular loss. If you're not a construction expert, the granules are the small stones that protect the outer surface of the rooftop. And these are naturally shed throughout the course of the life of the roof every time it rains, snows, and particularly hails on the rooftop. And so what we tested and validated in partnership with IBHS here is that understanding the accumulated damage on the rooftop led to about a 58x increase in our ability to predict future claims. So roof age is a great way to be able to understand what has affected that roof in the past, which ultimately leads to improved claims predictions. So we get a little background there on the material science behind why roof age matters. Let's see how this method stacks up against our carrier loss data. So let's draw our eyes to the chart to start. Across the x-axis here, we've split our roof age into 5-year increments or bins. These are represented in those gray bars. So that's showing the count of policies within each one of these bins. And then what we did is we actually benchmarked this against the loss ratio performance, which is indicated in the 2 lines on the chart. So the pink line there is looking at our wind and hail loss ratio for this particular carrier. And the blue line is looking at all other peril. Get familiar with this chart. You're going to see this a few more times throughout the course of the deck as we look to compare these various techniques. What's interesting about the performance that we see here is pretty strong lift overall. We can see not only from wind and hail, but also on our all other peril, which is really important. A lot of times people think about these roof rating techniques as being exclusive to wind and hail, which is not always the case. The other thing that we found pretty fascinating here is that our lift, if we look at this chart, is fairly linear here in kind of the first 10 years of the life, and then really starts to ramp up across that 10-year mark, in particular from years 10 through 20, which kind of, echoes what the IBHS found in their research with that seal strip degradation. And so if we think about this performance, we'll now take our eyes to the left, right? We know roof age has been around forever, but what are the top benefits of it? Well, ease of implementation has to be right up there, right? We saw 90% of carriers already using this. We're getting strong lift on wind and hail. And then in particular, we also have great flexibility. Sam showed some of the different articles coming out, right? You can use this in your roof replacement schedules. We can use it to set eligibility guidelines and the like. But not every solution is perfect. So there are some opportunities there. Roof age, biggest opportunity is probably around data quality. The majority of roof age data in the industry comes from agent and homeowner best guesses on what the current age of the rooftop is. And so there's a big opportunity that we generally see to change the outcome of this variable by just simply improving the acquisition of where we're getting that from. The other thing that's really important and is a big opportunity here is there are real-time exceptions to understand the roof's condition, which I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. And then, of course, with any of these features, they have additive power if we could start to combine them with other things. Think about things like material and location. We know that roofs of different materials age differently, and of course, in different geographic regions. So what about roof condition? Sam mentioned this has popped up a lot in the last 5 years, and we want to test, is that rightfully so? Why are so many folks kind of moving to roof condition or adding this to the arsenal? And the way we wanted to test that against the carrier portfolio here was, how does this stack up? Is roof condition really different from roof age? Are the two just completely correlated with one another? What kind of added benefit are we getting? So here, what we did was we actually mapped along the x-axis the Zesty AI roof condition gradient. So we start on the left with a good roof and we work our way across to a major damage roof. For each of these, we looked at the distribution by roof age that falls within these designations. And what we found was, like you would expect for our good roofs, we've got an average age of about 6.5 years on the sample and a pretty tight spread overall. As we work our way up to light wear and then heavy wear, we see our age creep up to about 12 years, and we start to see a wider spread in the distribution of ages. This is to be expected. As a roof ages, you would expect its overall condition to degrade. But then we notice something a little bit more interesting on the right. As we get into minor and major damage, which would include things like missing shingles, tarped roofs, torn membrane, maybe if it's a flat rooftop, we start to see here that we no longer follow this trend. And what we see is that we can sustain damage to the roof irrespective of the age of it, which is pretty important to understand, which means, okay, yes, these are picking up different valuable pieces of information that can help us understand how to rate the rooftop. We're going to leave the benefits and opportunities for the next slide. I want to now transition and see how this feature performed against our carrier loss data. So if we take a look here, very similar chart to what we had before. Our lines, again, representing our loss ratios. Pink for our wind and hail loss ratio, and blue for all other peril loss ratio. What we now mapped across the x-axis in this case is that gradient of roof condition. So far left is a good roof, far right is one that has sustained major damage. And what we see again is pretty strong lift from this feature, in kind of that 1.5 to 2x, which is pretty typical for a portfolio. But what you'll notice are these gray bars in the background, right? The distribution of these scores. And what we see is a pretty thin tail here that fans off, which is really representative of the real world. About 80% of roofs out there, somewhere in that neighborhood, are going to be in good condition or sustain, light wear to them overall. And we have very few that are going to be in this heavy wear, minor and major damage state, which is where you see our lift sort of start to take off. The reason that's important to think about is how this could interplay with roof age. And then, of course, some of the benefits, again, of how you can start to use this feature. So we can now draw our eyes over to the benefits section. And that thinner tail with that strong lift is one of the main benefits. This lends itself really well to underwriting. So you can think about how this would work into new business underwriting, as well as renewal re-underwriting, where you want to identify those adverse roofs. The other thing it's really good for is that it reflects the real-time nature of the rooftop. Roof age is static. We don't have that view of the external condition that you can get from something like this. And then thanks to aerial imagery, we have really high level of data availability and quality. But we know this is, again, not going to be a one-size-fits-all endeavor. So we have to look at some of the main opportunities. And you can see here, we could potentially have larger percentages of the population with lower segmentation, as we saw in kind of these good and light wear buckets on our chart to the right. We also know that we're not picking up these internal wear factors that we're able to capture with roof age. And then finally, which I think is important, is that potentially roof condition can over-index on this external appearance of the roof. So in your head, think about things like staining and streaking. I know these are highly debated in terms of their contribution to actual roof susceptibility. So we saw a good number of folks, I think it was 23% on the call, that were leveraging roof complexity. What is roof complexity, though? This is a term we've seen a lot in the last couple of years, and there doesn't seem to be a standard for what this really means. In general, our definition is, carrier partners typically building a GLM model where they're combining multiple features about the rooftop to try to assess risk. That's it in a nutshell. But when we dig a little further, and from my experience talking to carrier partners, typically what we see is a very simplistic kind of common occurrence, right? Roof complexity in the top box you can see here. Generally, we see folks using a feature something akin to the number of facets per square foot, which is generally a derivative from the 2D area of the rooftop. This works. We can definitely see some lift there, but we know that there's more value there, and several of our carrier partners use some of the features you can see in that bottom box. So what do we all understand about the rooftop? What can we extract using modern computer vision techniques? Well, we know all about the geometry of the roof material, pitch, the accessories on the roof like skylights, solar panels, even the roof penetrations down to individual pipe jacks on the roof. So there's a lot to unpack. And as a carrier, how do you know what should make it into your loss model? How do we know which individual features are going to pop? So we took a look again at our carrier sample here, and we wanted to backtest on a few of the more unique features that we often don't see included in carrier rating plans, even ones that are leveraging roof complexity. And so we've got 4 charts looking at 4 different univariate features. And in each chart, you'll see that we've got our legend on the left here. We're going to be looking at the all peril loss ratio, represented by that pink line. And then a metric that I myself and my team like to use, which is the average premium per $1,000 of TIV. And the reason that we like that one is it shows how is the current rating plan trending across each of these different dimensions. And then we can sort of look for a dislocation between the two to identify opportunities. So in these 4 charts, we looked at roof facet, roof pitch, the number of penetrations, and then roof mounted solar. Again, things that we don't often see included in a rating plan. With each of these, what's interesting to see is we typically see the declining line in the gray dashes there, representing the carrier's current rating plan. So as facets increase, as pitch increases, as the number of penetrations increases, we're tending to see that they're not capturing premium for that. When on the other hand, we can see the loss ratio is actually working in the opposite direction. So identifying these dislocations can help us pick out which features are going to help drive an improved rating plan. I'll specifically call out an interesting insight that we found in this portfolio. Looking at the presence of solar on the rooftop, they were actually seeing a 32% increase in their average severity when they had these solar panels present. So definitely some area to drive improvement on the rating plan. So where do we go from there? We need to take all this data and we need to turn it into a model that represents the overall complexity of the rooftop. In this case, for this carrier portfolio, we combine the area of the roof, material, shape, facet counts, penetration, and the pitch. That basically gives us this combined understanding of complexity. We then graded that on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being a low complexity roof, 10 being high complexity. And here we can see 4 different charts looking at the overall loss ratio lift, like you've seen on prior slides, for these individual perils. So starting in the top left, we have wind, top right, hail. And then on the bottom, we actually looked at some sub-perils. So water freeze and even interior water, all showing strong lift. And what you'll notice as well is that wind and hail lift is elevated over some of the values that we saw on the prior slides. So we know combining multiple features to get a better understanding of the roof can provide strong lift, not only for wind and hail, but from my experience in talking to carriers, we'll typically see something like 6 to 9 sub-perils also showing lift with a well-built roof complexity model. So I hit on several of these benefits already, but we get additional lift and we typically get more consistent lift using a complexity model versus some of the other more simple univariate methods that we talked about first. We also have a little bit more flexibility when you think about the class creation and how you want to distribute your portfolio across these 10 bins. But there are also some opportunities that exist. Probably the biggest one I see is that carriers that are already using roof complexity may not be using the full breadth of features. So there's additional opportunity that lives there. And then the last two are different, but somewhat similar, I would say, in the fact that these models are assumption dependent, and we'll talk more about what that means when we get into more modern modeling techniques. But effectively, someone has to go through, like we did, and look at all the different univariate lift opportunities, and then start to think about how multiple features might interact with one another and come up with sort of baked-in assumptions, which don't always represent well against the real-world complexity of roof modeling. So that's a lot of ground to cover already. We still need to get to our peril-specific models, but I want to hand it back over to Sam. I think we're going to go through one more audience poll.
Well, that was great, Ross. Love those lift charts for the different complexity features. We want to hear from our audience. What roof complexity factors caught your eye? Which factors do you think have the most potential in your business? You can choose all that apply. Some options here: roof pitch, 3D roof area, facet count, eave height, roof penetration, solar panel area, ridge count divided by length, or valley count divided by length. A lot of options here. We got to see a lot of those lift charts. What stood out to you? So we'll give you another minute to get your responses in, and we'll go through the results of the poll. Solar panel area came out on top, 69%. Looks like roof pitch was next. And then a couple in the middle: roof area, facet count, roof penetrations. Ross, any surprises here from your perspective?
I'm a little surprised on solar panels, though they are growing in popularity pretty wildly and they are quite expensive, so that makes sense. The rest are all pretty intuitive. I think roof pitch is probably the one that we get the most consistent lift with on carriers' portfolios that they're not capturing today. No big surprises, but always want to let the data talk, and each carrier portfolio is different.
I think that 32% increase in indemnity with solar panel area might have caught folks' eye. Go ahead, take it away, Ross.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sam. So let's dive back in. Right now, we've been talking about this progression of kind of typical things that we see on the market and this incremental path forward of improved lift. Now we want to talk about something that is just fundamentally different. And this is the type of modeling that we do, our peril-specific models at Zesty AI, which are all gradient boosting machines, which is a type of machine learning model that we use. And I want to talk about how these models are different, what makes them unique, and then of course we want to apply this to our carrier case study as well. 3 main big areas that make these models different than what we've talked about previously. Number one is they are property specific and hyper local. So we are looking at real-time data for each property. We've got a full breadth of over 50 features that we can draw from. The next area is that it's very important to combine the climate with the structure. We know, and it's very easy for people to think and understand, that climate will behave differently on different types of structures and in different situations. So our models allow for a rich interaction between the climate and the characteristics of the home. What that also allows us to be able to do is to independently model both the likelihood of claim frequency and claim severity, which is something that we really haven't touched on in too much depth so far, and something that the other techniques we've covered across tend to struggle with. The last piece that I'll touch on is industry loss data. These models are all built and trained against actual losses from the carrier market. This is very important to understand. I think it's, based on all the charts Sam showed in the beginning, we know that modeling has not performed well as of late. In particular, stochastic models have struggled with simulating losses. And we believe that using historic losses in predictive models can do a much better job go forward. But the reason we're doing all this is underpinned in that bottom blue ribbon that you see there. And the reason we're here is to drive with this new modeling technique intra-territory risk splitting. As of today, most models are focused on this territory-based rating. And we believe with these modern techniques, we can get right down to the property level, which will provide a huge advantage to get us away from that peanut butter spread approach that Sam mentioned earlier. So let's talk about why this is important, why using these modern techniques matter with some real world examples. We live in a very non-linear world, and I'm going to elaborate on what that means and why it's relevant when we talk about modeling with a couple of examples. So let's think about a typical roof. We have a combination of skylights on a pitched roof. When we see this, we have a pretty negligible effect from having the presence of skylights. But if we move to a flat roof and we add skylights, we know that this roof's more susceptible to ponding, debris buildup around those skylights, and we would see increased claims coming from this in an exponential manner. This is what we would call a nonlinear relationship. We can also look at the climate. We can say, well, hey, we have 2 hailstorms, we're probably going to have 2 times the claims. Well, if we have 5 hailstorms, we're probably not going to have 5 times the claims. There's a saturation effect that occurs when we see climatological events and how they would bear fruit in terms of claims filed. This is, again, a nonlinear effect. Third example, aging on a shingled roof has a very linear increase in claims, it increases claims exponentially. But now if we look at a metal roof, it's much less reactive to the age overall. This increases in a linear fashion and then flattens out pretty heavy. So again, a nonlinear relationship. Now imagine these types of examples, except you've got potentially 30 features, maybe up to 50 with the climatology woven in. This is a lot to try to fully capture and to try to capture in a linear fashion when we know these interactions don't behave in that capacity. So let's look at how this would actually bear fruit in rating with some more visual examples. If we start on the left, we've got a rooftop with the presence of skylights and a pretty typical pitch of a 612 on the roof. For this, we've got a rating factor of 1.05. Now let's go to the next roof. We have no skylights and we've got a low or a flat pitch roof at a 112, rate factor of 1.1. But what happens if we move to the right and now we've got the presence of skylights and we also have low slope? Well, if we use a linear model, you can see in this box in the center, it's gonna operate in a very additive way, and we're gonna have an approximate new rate factor of 1.15. However, if we use a non-linear model like a GBM, we can account for both of these features and how they interact with one another at the same time. In this case, we have a rate factor of 1.14. I kind of call this the 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, and this can occur all over when we're looking at how to assess risk on the rooftop. This is, again, a very simple example. We're only looking at 2 variables at a time here, but it's to convey the point in terms of how this nonlinearity works. If you think about the GBMs like Z-wind and Z-hail, we could be looking at millions, even up to billions of interaction effects in a one-to-many relationship between these individual features, between the climate and the structure itself. So let's get back to our carrier case study. We understand a little bit more about why this nonlinear world matters, why a GBM is different, and how this approach behaves. Let's look at how it worked out on our carrier portfolio. So here we're looking at how it performed against the full loss sample from all 17 states. On the left, we have our hail performance chart. On the right, our wind performance chart. And what we can see here, the pink line again is representing our loss ratio against the hail peril. The blue line this time is showing kind of that average water line. What's our loss ratio average? And then the gray bars represent our scores and how they're distributed. So on the left is a very low risk property coming from our hail model, and on the right is a high risk property. Here you can see we're seeing very outsized lift compared to what we've seen previously. We're talking approximately 70x lift in this case. So extremely different from what we've seen previously. Similar on the wind side, not quite as outsized, but still a lot different than the 1.5 to 2x that we saw previously. Again, here we're separating our risk on this 1 to 10 scale across the bottom from our wind model predictions. The gray bars representing our distribution, and then the red is showing again that loss ratio. What I like to look at here is this intersection with the blue line in both charts. You can see there's a real opportunity, in kind of scores 5 to 6 through 10 in both cases, where you could start to think about how you would rate these differently, potentially take underwriting action or put other loss cost control measures in play. But that was on the whole sample. We said we would drive towards intra-territory segmentation. So here we're actually looking at an individual neighborhood in Lubbock, Texas, and this is a visual showing how the model is actually separating or splitting risk. So these red arrows or dots indicate high-risk properties as flagged by the model, blue are low-risk properties, and you can see here that even up the same street from another property, you could have a differentiation in risk, which if you guys all live through hail claims being filed and different storm events, we know that unless it is massive size hail, you'll typically have this effect where not all properties within a neighborhood will have a claim, and models like this can help you discern between those properties. Let's look at the data now at the kind of that hyper-local level. So here we're looking at that same zip code. We've got about 700 properties, and we're going to again look at our performance in terms of hail loss ratio. So our pink line again representing that overall hail loss ratio, our average loss ratio in our blue dashed line, and then our distribution of risk across the bottom by hail score. And what we see here is even within a territory, we're getting about 16x lift, which is pretty incredible, especially when you potentially today are just charging a flat rate at the territory level. And then again, there's a lot of opportunity here to individually apply different techniques, on the underwriting spectrum. Again, here we can imagine how you could selectively go out and try and acquire more of the 1 through 5 risks through appropriate pricing. And then, of course, you could go out and put in direct targeting measures for roofs in the high risk segment in terms of eligibility, ACV roof, and the like. So assumptions have been pretty transparent, I think, to this point, but we're really able to maximize lift and segmentation and then drive a higher degree of optionality in terms of your underwriting plans and your loss cost control measures. Now, what are some of the opportunities? Because it's all been so far. There are a few there as well. Here we can see that interpretability can be a challenge. So some AI models could be perceived as a black box. We've gone through extra measures at Zesty AI to ensure that's not the case. So with each of our risk scores, we also provide the top 3 reasons why a specific risk score is such that it is. In addition to that, the other 2 factors that are open for opportunity are really around building and training and kind of maintaining a stack around these. They can be, difficult to build and complex to tune in order to maximize performance. With that, I know we're up against the clock here, Sam. We want to recap across kind of this whole spectrum, what we saw, how do these stack up, and what can we distill from this? Just to recap, roof age. This is an area of quick win. We can see improved data quality to get that attained more easily. We can capture unseen damage on the roof, and we can provide all peril lift relatively easily there. How about condition and complexity? Well, here we saw elevated performance in terms of wind and hail lift, strong value in terms of underwriting, especially with roof condition. And then we had consistent all other peril lift, which is something that's really important. Again, today's session is not just about that wind and hail rating. And then on the peril-specific front, we're really able to maximize lift. We saw this kind of exponential jump. We have new opportunities for underwriting and rating and product fit. And then we can move to an approach that goes away from this assumption-based approach of linear modeling and move into a data-driven and more explainable methodology. Sam?
Ross, that was awesome. I love those pros and cons you shared at the end. It's really a great roadmap for our audience. So we've reached the end of our presentation. Now's your chance to get your questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as possible. And if we run out of time, we'll follow up with you after the webinar to get your question answered. So while you're getting those questions in, we have an exclusive offer that's only available to this masterclass, exclusive access to our next webinar, where we'll delve into the peril of non-weather water. We'll cover a new approach to predicting and preventing non-weather water and freeze losses. So go ahead and snap that QR code and register to be part of our next masterclass. Okay, we have quite a few questions, Ross. So the first question, does it work on residential and commercial? So yes, what we went through today would apply equally to residential structures and commercial structures. So whether it's calculating a roof age, assessing condition, complexity of a roof, or the peril-specific models, the concepts we reviewed today and where ZSDAI works is these models apply to both commercial and residential roofs. Okay, next question. Ross, I think this one's for you. I assume after a roof is replaced, the risk score would improve.
Yeah, good question. So in general, yes, that would be the case. However, it is important to understand that these models are looking at a multitude of individual features. So potentially a roof could be replaced and you wouldn't see a significant improvement in the risk score. But in general, that is factored into the model and you would likely see an improvement to the overall risk score.
Makes sense. Okay, next question. How often is the imagery that feeds the data updated? I can grab this one. So at ZSDAI, we use all the top imagery providers. So the data is really fresh. Most properties are refreshed 3 to 4 times a year. In the very rural areas, the images would be updated less frequently, maybe 1 or 2 times a year. So this is from Nicole. You discussed roof complexities and characteristics. Any known correlations between particular roof features and claims based on your research? Ross, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we hit on some of those during our study. Each of the features I showed in the box on the earlier slide do have univariate lift against claims. So, I mean, to name a few, the roof material, roof age, the overall shape of the roof, whether it's a gable or hip roof, pitch can have an impact on claims, number of roof penetrations. And then the presence of solar panels and skylights definitely can have an impact either on claims frequency or severity. Again, important to make that distinction. Different features might provide leverage in a different area, whether that be frequency or severity.
Makes sense. Thanks, Ross. A lot of interest in the complexity. This one's from Jessica. For solar panel aspect, I start to wonder if we would be double dipping because it would already be included in replacement cost calculation and reflected in coverage A pricing, if correctly entered and or underwritten. But then we'd also be including it in the roof modeling pricing. Any thoughts around that? Does that one make sense, Ross?
Yeah, it's a common occurrence. There are lots of features like that. So another example that wouldn't necessarily be double dipping, but has the same sort of thought process around it. Think about a premium roof, like a metal roof, for example, would raise the TIV or the insured value on the home, but can also still find its way into the roof rating plan or algorithm. I think the important distinction there is mapping your loss experience to that individual feature. So irrespective of your coverage value, if the feature is still providing outsized losses, it's likely to not be double dipping. So there could be lots of lots of features on the home that could work in the capacity you're describing.
Anonymous question. Thanks for sharing these segmentation opportunities. Is there a product offering for a layperson to request this information for their home and know how to mitigate the risk on their home? So right now we're focused 100% working with insurance carriers, commercial and residential carriers. So we don't have a publicly available product. I think that might be a place we could go in the future. But we do make the scores and the top drivers available to carriers. And we really encourage homeowners to work with carriers to mitigate the risks and try to avoid the losses. And that's why we try to be as transparent as possible in what's driving the scores and provide that back to insurance carriers to work with their policyholders. Okay, this one's from Leslie. Ross, how exactly is your model determining roof condition? For example, aerial.
Yeah, so the roof condition feature that we have is derived using computer vision modeling. The model effectively uses a large set of hand-labeled data by humans. So we take images and we basically label those images to reflect each various roof condition bucket. And then over time, the computer vision model learns, just like a person would, which types of roofs and which types of features these individual roofs have should be placed into each of these buckets. So if we look at a good roof, it's seen a whole bunch of good roofs and it's, is trained and learned to understand what those are. And as you work your way across the spectrum, if we get to a major damage roof, it starts to understand what a tarp looks like and can identify those and then place them in that major damage bucket.
Okay, another anonymous question, Ross. What are Zesty's scores built on? Primarily flyover images and weather?
So it really depends on the modeling that we're talking about. If we're, today's session focused a lot on our wind and hail peril-specific models. So for that, you have a host of different features. The majority are derived from aerial imagery. We have some from tax assessor data. We have geospatial data as well. Think about things like topography. And then, of course, a whole host of climatological data as well. So you get a variety in there. If we talk about other models, that we have, you might be pulling from different sources as well, like MLS data and the like.
Exactly. Okay, next one's from Joe. Roof condition rating from aerial imagery is beginning to receive pushback from policyholders and states. Have you experienced questioning, and how are you addressing it?
Yeah, good question. So we have had some questions from our carrier partners. We've seen the NAIC bulletin that came out a few months ago. So there's definitely heightened, kind of scrutiny around all things AI. We are definitely on top of those. So we have a director of regulatory strategy that works very closely with our carrier partners to help support the validation and an understanding of how our models are built to make sure that they meet all compliance regulations that are put in play. And we can definitely have a breakout session on that one if we need to. That's a lot to cover off in a short Q&A.
Yeah, regulatory is a big topic. That's why we have a director of regulatory strategy that works really closely with our carrier partners to review the models, and test for biases, work with our carrier partners to have them approved. And as we talked about, even going independently and getting approval in states like Texas, Colorado, Illinois for our Z-Storm models. Does interterritory scores consider geographic differences, or is it solely based on home roof attributes?
So they're considered, but they would be shared. So if you think about the geography overall in an area, right, you might have slightly varied topography, but in general, if you look at that small neighborhood like we saw in our example, those homes all experienced approximately the same climatology, right? They had the same hail event go through, one or many times. And what's making the difference then is the intersection of the climatology and the property specific elements. We know each home won't behave the same way in that storm. A steep tile roof is not going to behave the same way as a worn out flat roof when that storm goes through. And so when you think about that intra-territory risk splitting, you're really thinking about the intersection of the climatology with the individual property characteristics, even though the climatology at that hyperlocal level is probably relatively consistent.
Makes sense. This one's from Emily. Can you take a sample data source from our area to see how many data points from our rural area? Just want to make sure there would be enough data for us to make decisions or use your product. So Emily, we'd be happy to do a free coverage check for you. Look, across your portfolio, what's our coverage? How old is the data? We'd be happy to do that for free. Let's just connect after this session. Couple more. Could you please repeat the states that the model is approved and being used in? And is that for eligibility and rating? So that's from Andy. So have only been talking about the Z-Storm model, so Z-Storm, Z-Wind, and Z-Hail. They're currently approved in Texas, Illinois, and Colorado, and pending in many other states. And happy to work with you to make sure we proactively get those approved so you can take advantage of those for both eligibility and rating where you're operating. There's Joanna. Do you have info on wood shake shingles? We require that a fire retardant treatment has been done in the last 5 years. Any other concerns to consider outside of age on wood shake shingles, Ross?
We do have information on wood shake shingles, meaning we can identify those, specifically home to home. We would not have information on whether the fire retardant treatment was done to the individual shingles. And then in terms of evaluating them, they are an input to our wind and hail predictive risk models. So that would be a starting point. If you're trying to address specifically wind and hail damage, that's probably your best bet. Otherwise, for those, I would probably also want to add in some other features like roof penetration, skylights, the pitch of the roof, and see if you can get a little bit more lift versus just using the roof material when you see those wood roofs. Those can be extremely expensive, and I know a lot of carriers have started to steer away from those because they are generally not quite as durable and yet still pretty expensive. So it can be a tough product to insure.
So another like residential versus commercial question is, you're modeling for residential only. Is there commercial segmentation?
Yeah. So the models, both as Sam mentioned, are built, trained, and validated on both residential and commercial losses. We would expect to see predictive lift in either case. So no concerns there. The only caveat I will mention when we say commercial, there's just a vast variety of what that could be. In general, we kind of say somewhere around the 40,000 square foot mark in terms of buildings. We generally are not using these tools on these large industrial complexes. So think about your habitational kind of mom and pop strip mall, BOP type properties. It should work quite well for those.
And we also have commercial specific models looking at the material on the low slope roofs. So we do have some extra bells and whistles for commercial properties.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, Ross, we made it to the end. We just want to thank everyone for attending the masterclass. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with a recording of the webinar, and we would encourage you to read the companion research to this masterclass, The Insurer's Guide to Roof Risk. And don't forget to sign up for the next webinar on interior water. We want your feedback. Did this masterclass resonate? How can we better tailor the content to meet your needs in the future? So fill out the Zoom survey at the conclusion of this webinar. We want to hear your feedback. And finally, we'd love to stay connected. Our contact information is below. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk more if there's an opportunity to work with Zesty AI. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.